John Bednini has a prototype free energy motor. Imagine having a small direct current electrical motor sitting on your laboratory bench powered by a common 12-volt battery. Imagine starting with a fully charged battery and connecting it to the motor with no other power input. Obviously, the motor is going to run off the battery, bulletin by conventional thinking it will stop when the battery runs down. Impossible, you say? Not at all. That is precisely what John Bednini has done, and the motor is running now in his workshop. It isn't running by the conventional wisdom of electrical physics. It isn't running by the conventional rules of electric motors and generators, but it is running. And it isn't something complex. It is pretty simple, once one gets the hang of the basic idea. It is running off the principles of electromagnetics that Nikola Tesla discovered shortly before 1900 in his Colorado Springs experiments. It is running off the fact that empty vacuum, pure emptiness, so to speak, is filled with rivers and oceans of seething energy, just as Nikola Tesla pointed out. It is running off the fact that vacuum space-time itself is nothing but pure massless charge. That is, vacuum has a very high electrostatic scalar potential, it is greatly stressed. To usefully tap the enormous locked-in energy of that stress, all one has to do is crack it sharply and tap the vacuum oscillations that result. The best way to do that is to hit something resonant that is embedded in the vacuum, then tap the resonant stress of the ringing of the vacuum itself. In other words, we can ring something at its resonant frequency, and, if that's something embedded in the vacuum, we can tap off the resonance in vacuum stress, without tapping energy directly from the embedded system we rang into oscillation. So what we really need is something that is deeply embedded in the vacuum, that is, something that can translate vacuum movement to mass movement. Well, all charged particles and ions are already embedded in the vacuum by their charged fluxes, so stressed oscillations, that is, vacuum oscillations, can be converted into normal energy of mass movement by charged particles or ions, if the system of charged particles or ions is made to resonate in phase with our tapping potential. For our purpose, let's use a system of ions. First, we will need a big accumulator to hold a lot of the charged ions in the system that we wish to shock into oscillation. We need something that has a big capacitance and also contains a lot of ions. An ordinary battery filled with electrolyte fits the bill nicely. While it is not commonly known, ordinary lead-acid storage batteries have a resonant ionic frequency, usually in the range of from 1 to 6 MHz. All we have to do is shock oscillate the ions in the electrolyte at their resonant frequency and time our trigger potential and siphon current correctly. Then if we keep adding potential to trigger the system, we can get all that potential to translate into free electrical energy. Look at it this way. Conventionally, electrostatic scalar potential is composed of work or energy per coulomb of charged particle mass. So if we add potential alone, without the mass flow, to a system of oscillating charged particles, we add physical energy in the entire charged particle system. In other words, the potential we add is converted directly into ordinary energy by the embedded ions in the system. And if we are clever, we don't have to furnish any pushing energy to move pure potential around. For proof that it is possible, see Bearden's Toward a New Electromagnetics, Part 4, Vectors and Mechanisms Clarified, Tesla Book Corporation, 1983, Slide 19, page 43, and the accompanying write-up, pages 10 to 11. Also see Y. Iharonov and V. Bohm, Significance of Electromagnetic Potentials in the Quantum Theory, Physical Review, 2nd Series, Volume 115, Number 3, August 1, 1959, pages 485 to 491. On page 490 you will find that it's possible to have a field-free region of space, and still have the potential determine the physical properties of the system. Now this free energy resonant coupling can be done in a simple, cheap system. You don't need big cyclotrons and huge laboratories to do it, you can do it with ordinary direct current motors, batteries, controllers and trigger circuits. And that is exactly what John Bednini has done. It is real. It works. It is running now on John's laboratory bench in prototype form. But that is not all. John also is a humanitarian. He is concerned as I am that little old widow lady at the end of the lane, stretching her meager social security check as far as she can, shivering in the cold winter and not daring to run up her furnace because she can't afford the frightful utility bills. That is simply got to change, and John Bednini may well be the fellow who changes it. By openly releasing his work in this paper, he is providing enough information for all the tinkerers and independent inventors around the world to have at it. If he can get 1,000 of them to duplicate his device, it simply can't be suppressed as so many others have been. So here it is. John has deliberately written his paper for the tinkerer and experimenter, not for the scientist. You must be careful, for the device is a little tricky to adjust in and synchronize all the resonances. You will have to fiddle with it, but it will work. Keep it up. Also, we warn you not to play with this unless you know what you are doing. The resonating battery electrolyte produces hydrogen, and if you hit it too hard with a voltage spike, you can get an electrical spark inside the battery. If that happens, the battery will explode, so don't mess with it unless you are qualified and use utmost caution. But it does work. So all you experimenters and pioneers, now is your chance. Have at it. Build it. Tinker with it. Fiddle it into resonant operation. Then let's build this thing in quantity, sell it widely, and get those home utilities down to where we can all afford them, including the shivering little old lady at the end of the lane. And when we do, let's give John Bednini, and inventors like him, the credit and appreciation they so richly deserve. Tom Bearden, April 13, 1984. One day a boy plays with motors and generators, gets a brilliant idea. He reasons with himself, if I hook the motor to the generator via the same shaft, the generator should run the motor and vice versa. He soon discovers that many things are against him, so he devises better schemes and finds the same things again. However you may view this article, it does not count, because the principles on which our machine works are completely different. At this point, I will make reference to Tom Bearden's Toward a New Electromagnetics, Part 4, Vectors and Mechanisms Clarified, Tesla Book Corporation, 1983. If you plan to build this machine, it is a must that you get Tom Bearden's paper. You will find on pages 20, 21, and 22 the description of a simple free energy motor. Also, you will find a block diagram on page 53, slide 40. Understanding the material in this paper is a must, or you may not succeed in building this simple free energy generator. Special thanks is given to Tom Bearden for discussing a multitude of questions. Without him, this would not have been possible. Any errors made in this paper are my own and not the fault of others. I must also state that neither John Bednini nor the publisher takes any responsibility for misuse of the information in the present paper due to bad hookups, misuse of the battery, or faulty mechanical workmanship. Basic concepts. For some time man has been looking for different ways to generate electricity. He has used water power, steam power, nuclear power and solar power. Recent papers written by Tom Bearden make a free energy generator possible. Tom Bearden, rather than patent his devices, chose to share them with people who had open ears. I myself have had numerous conversations with Tom Bearden. I found Tom to be one of the most reasonable men I have ever dealt with in this energy field. Most others would tell you stories of great machines they had, but would never present the truth with circuit diagrams or a look at the machine in question. Tom, on the other hand, clearly presents his ideas and discloses the concepts by means of which they work. The facts I am about to present to you about free energy were never put into textbooks, only portions were. The textbooks have grounded people in conventional theory and made things very complicated. What I am about to explain is very simple. Anyone can understand this theory, and anyone who understands what he is doing can build this device. I have been grounded in conventional theory for some 11 years. I have always tried to study the simplicity of electrical circuits, but my mind wouldn't allow this because of my orthodox training. In any event, had to change the way I was looking at things. I started to wonder, why do we need to have things so complicated? The truth of the matter is, we have been taught to consume or waste energy at every turn in our lives, so we jump into our cars, turn on lights, etc. In other words, we have been conditioned to waste energy and fuels lavishly, not realizing that someday someone will skyrocket our energy bills to a point where we will not be able to pay for these fuels. Everything will come to a standstill. But laugh as you will, at this time Rube Goldberg machines will power your future. It probably not be uncommon to see machines from the size of garbage cans to the size of two-story apartment houses powering everything in sight. These machines will be using a force in nature never conceived by the conventionally trained mind of today. The theory I am about to explain to you will bring you one step closer to gaining free energy. To begin my story, I must state that I had a vision, looking for this energy. Many times I hammered my head into the ground, but I refused to give up in my search. Any person with a dream should never let it be wasted by fools, who will always say you can't do that. All that statement really means is that they do not know how to do it. There are many different ways to explain this theory. I will discuss the first one now. The device is very simple and uses electronic circuits. Basically, we drive a direct current motor with pulsed current from a battery, then utilize a special means to cause the battery to recharge itself. First, the battery is connected to a simple flip-flop circuit which in turn drives a simple amplifier circuit. The load, motor, is connected to Q4, 2N5885, figure 3, or between the positive pole of the battery and the collector of the output power transistor. As the motor starts moving forward, the load condition is decreased and the motor draws very little electrical energy. As the energy drawn from the battery is decreased, the flip-flop circuit goes faster and faster to a certain point, which determines the speed of the circuit. However, we can vary the speed by adding certain things that are also simple. The idea is to pulse the motor in a certain time frame, drive a flywheel of some mass, and convert the mass's angular momentum to energy for our use, giving back to the battery all we have robbed from it during one power pulse plus adding a little bit more. An easy way to look at this is to say the battery is 12 volts. To charge this battery, we need at least 2 volts over the battery voltage, so we need 14 volts applied in the correct direction. See figure 1. Recharging a battery from a generator. Looking at figure 1, we can see that the generator is at 14 volts and the battery is at 12 volts, so we have a reverse flow condition in the battery, which means the battery in a charging condition. If, however, the generator did not make 14 volts but say only made 10.5 volts, the generator would act like a motor and just drain the battery away and the current meter would show discharge. So far, this is all just conventional theory on how batteries are charged, and this is all you will find in textbooks, except for some books that tell you to make special power supplies to charge batteries faster. With the machine I am going to describe to you, we will do better than that. We can actually boil the battery away if this device is not properly constructed. Let's begin by stating certain facts. The ions move backwards under charging conditions and in reverse under discharge conditions. So here we start our new concept. Suppose we have constructed a machine that has tricked this battery into a different space and time relationship. Simply put, suppose the battery never did any work and it should have full charge left in it. Suppose this becomes possible because we have stressed the terminals in such a way that the ions in the battery electrolyte actually move themselves backwards. The machine, or unit, that makes this possible has many different names. Some people call units generators, energizers, alternators, etc. Conventionally, such devices have one thing in common: they stress the battery backwards by pushing electricity to the battery and forcibly pushing the ions in the electrolyte backwards. In our theory, we are not going to push anything, the ions are going to move themselves, recharging the battery. If we go a little deeper into this theory, you are probably asking yourself, what is this madman talking about? Simply put, we are going to put a stress on the battery terminals for a moment in time and the battery will do the rest. Now comes the heavy part of this theory. What they didn't teach you in textbooks is that, in order for the battery to charge, two oscillatory actions must occur, one at the positive terminal and one at the negative terminal. Under different stress levels this then forces the ions backwards. The same would occur for an electron. Our machine will slingshot ions in the battery electrolyte backwards beyond the normal recoil action. Figure 2. Ringing of ions in the battery from a hammer effect. I must give a very stern warning at this time that, if the voltage developed is too high, the battery will explode. Use the utmost care. Test setups in my lab have proven that this can be dangerous. Do not build the device and experiment with it unless you know what you are doing, and use the utmost caution. When struck by a sharp voltage spike, the electrolyte in the battery will resonate at a certain frequency, and this can also force the ions backwards. Simply put, the battery, the motor and the energizer will become resonant at some point, ring like a bell when we strike it, and in its ringing the most energy will be developed. The control circuit. For people who like to tinker and like electronics, these are the circuits I have used in my lab to examine this new concept. The circuit contains a very simple, free-running multivibrator circuit which is used to gate the operation of a two-stage amplifier. A motor or other load is connected in series with the collector of the output transistor, and each time the transistor conducts voltage, it will be applied across the load. The input power may be any direct current voltage from 6 to 24 volts. The rectangular wave developed at the collector of the second transistor is resistively coupled to the base of the 2N5875, gating it on and off. This stage in turn gates the operation of the 2N5885 used in the output stage. A motor is connected from the positive side of the battery to the collector of the output transistor. The motor pulses at the frequency of the multivibrator. See Figure 3 page 19. Figure 3. Circuit for the Bednini free energy device. In Figure 3 it must be remembered that the tuning of the circuit is very important in that the pulsar circuit must be out of phase with the controller circuit. Those persons who have instruments to check this must connect the probes of an oscilloscope on channel A to the collector of the 2N5885 and ground the scope to channel B which must be across the battery. The waveforms should look like those shown in Figure 4. Figure 4. Oscilloscope waveforms. In studying this new concept a little bit further, we see that something very unconventional as far as pulsed waveforms go, but the energizer is doing something very unusual. The waveforms from the energizer are telling us a new story. If we take the scope and expand these waveforms out even further, around 50 MHz, the waveforms look completely different. See Figure 5. Figure 5. Stimulated resonance provides self-charging. As we look at Figure 5 the story becomes clear. The battery is really charging itself. The ions in the electrolyte are being stressed in a curved space and time relationship. The battery is actually forced into believing that no work ever occurred. The oscillatory action that has taken place by the energizer has just pulsed our slingshot back and immediately let go. Once this has happened, the electrolyte in the battery goes wild and the ions race backwards, giving off hydrogen and oxygen gases. I must make a stern warning here. The time of the stimulating pulse is very important. If the time is too long, the battery will burn itself out. If the pulse time is too short or if the circuit fails to operate correctly, the battery will never recover its charge. Taking this into consideration, the only failures that could occur would be the controller failing to operate due to a points failure, or the multivibrator latched in the on position. Anyone studying this can see that we have used very little energy to get to this point, and gained a lot of resonant energy in return. We must remember that, if the battery is applied to the energizer longer than normal, we must burn up the excess energy to keep the battery cool. The problem becomes one of embarrassing excess of energy, not a shortage. Now I have one question for you: what will you do with the excess energy and where did you get it? The energizer. The Energizer is also a simple machine, but if you want to, you can make it very complex. The simple way is to study the alternator principles. The wave we want to generate are like those that come from old direct current generators with the exception of armature drag, bearing drag and no excited fields. Also, we would want to cut the magnetic fields at 90 degrees to the armature. The simpler the better. I am going to throw a few ideas your way. I have run some tests in my lab and discovered that certain types of energizers, generators and alternators do what we need. Also, we want to be able to tune the output of our energizer. The old direct current generator puts out something very close to what we need, except for the drag. See Figure 6. Figure 6. Output pulses from a direct current generator. Looking at Figure 6, this is pulsed direct current and everybody will accept this, except me, because the other half has been left out once again. It is the same old story, wasting energy. Conventionally it is not important to know about the other half. Well, it is very important to me, because I need it to build my energizer. The direct current generator output actually looks like this when expanded. See Figure 7. Figure 7. Expanded output from a direct current generator. In an alternating current generator output we are going to see just what we manufactured. See Figure 8. Figure 8. Alternating current generator output. It would appear that this leaves this generator out. Not really, because we can make this generator's output change by rectifying it. See Figure 9. Figure 9. Rectified output from an alternating current generator. In looking at the alternating current generator with rectified output, we see that it could become very useful to us as an energizer, simply because it is the easiest to construct and its principles are simple. I have done experiments with a little different variation of this machine, as shown in Figure 10. Figure 10. Variation of a rectified alternating current generator. According to the conventional books, this alternator principle applies this way, as shown in Figure 11. Figure 11. Conventional explanation. In Figure 10 most people can see that the alternator drawn here might have some problems. However, remember that I am looking for a certain type of waveform that I want to tune to a certain frequency at a certain speed. The winding of this alternator is a problem and it is tricky, but I chose to stay with this unit. You may choose a different method if you retain the principle. The controller. The controller is a simple piece of equipment to build, however the controller in Figure 3 could present certain problems if the contacts or points were to arc closed. If this were to happen, the motor soon would drain the energy from the battery and things would die. There is another type of controller I must make known, and it is the simplest of all. With 3 brushes and a commutator, you can do away with all the electronics and handle 100 times the power back to the battery. The simplest method would be a split commutator, of which a little less than 100 degrees would be copper. See Figure 12. Figure 12. Split commutator. This split commutator is going to become our pulsar and our controller, doing away with all the electronics. Just think, no transistors to fail, no relays to stick, no resistors to burn up and the best of all, no cost. The only thing this unit requires is a little tinkering and later on you can add the vacuum advance. But enough joking around. The next step is to build a good unit that will last a long time. You may choose to build any other version you wish. Now, we need 3 12 brushes and you can begin to see how this is going to work for us. See Figure 13. Figure 13. Split commutator with 3 brushes. As we can see, the physical construction, Figure 13a, is nothing more than a simple switch, illustrated in Figure 13b. The thing to remember is that this commutator is completely insulated from the shaft, otherwise the bearings will arc in the motor and the heavy mass, or flywheel, will chew the bearings up. This controller only has one function, to gate the energy from the battery and to return it in the opposite direction. You have already seen the waveforms earlier in this paper. There may be some tinkering around to be done with brush 1 or brush 3, depending on which way you want to hook it up. Also, once again, the timing between brush 1 and brush 3 is very important. Let's look at the way this would be hooked up. See figure 14 on page 28. If you hook up the components as shown and tinker with it until you get a stimulated resonance coupled system, you will have a free running motor that powers itself and performs useful external work as well. I think I have presented the facts as they really are. The machine is simple and not complicated. If built and adjusted correctly, this unit should supply energy for whatever you need. Figure 14. Prototype hookup. A photo of a prototype is shown in figure 15 on 31, and on page 32 is a diagram of the device I am now building as the second phase of this development. The devices shown are my original concepts, of which I have actually built several working models. These have been witnessed by reliable observers. Several of these units are being constructed by friends and acquaintances, based on my instructions. For those who wish to build and make improvements in the units described, the very best of luck to you. I am willing to offer suggestions to those who are truly involved and need some assistance. John C. Bednini, April 9, 1984. Construction notes. For those interested in building and experimenting with a free energy unit, a brief description of the basic components used in the original prototype is as follows. Motor, General Electric permanent magnet, 1100 RPM, 1/12 horsepower. This motor draws approximately 10 amps on pulses on startup. As the speed of the motor increases, the amperage will decrease to about 1 amp on pulses. Permanent magnet motors are suggested based on good efficiency. Battery, 12 volt, 12 amp hour motorcycle battery. Energizer, a standard office type 2-speed alternating current fan was used for the housing. The coils were replaced with 6 coils of approximately 200 turns of 20-gauge wire, all in phase. 6 permanent magnets are bonded to an aluminum disc. The arrangement should be similar to that shown in figure 16A and 16B. This arrangement is basically a magneto, but will produce more amperage than ordinarily expected of a magneto. Controller. If the controller as shown in figure 13 is used, it is important that provision be made to rotate the brushes in relationship to each other in order to secure the required timing. The author again wishes to stress the fact that while the circuit and apparatus is not complicated, a great deal of tinkering may be required to obtain efficient operation. Much is yet to be discovered in the construction and operation of such unit, but the first major step has been made. Figure 15. Prototype of free energy unit. Figure 16A. Bedini's test model number 2. Figure 16B. Bedini's test model number 2, controller. Radiant potential energy charger. Provisional patent application of John C. Bedini and Thomas E. Bearden. August 15, 2003. Updated February 25, 2004. Document setup and figures. In this section, we give the setup of the provisional patent application document, and also show the figures illustrating the background of the invention and the invention itself, plus various selected embodiments. We first present the figures on separate pages, in section 0, so that all figures are clearly reproduced in the beginning. This includes the figures necessary to explain the background information. It is necessary to understand the background information before the operation of the invention can be understood, since the invention can only be described in terms of a mix of quantum field theory, particle physics, higher group symmetry, electrodynamics, etc. It is not described simply by electrical engineering. Following those figures are the figures of the invention itself, both in terms of circuit diagram and various embodiments showing typical applications of the invention. Energy exchange between active environment and system. Exchange need not be in equilibrium. Proven in modern particle physics. Arbitrarily absent in electrical power system engineering. Local active vacuum energy exchange with the system, which energy exchanges with local curvatures of space-time. Figure 17. The supersystem. System is an inert system. No environmental energy input. All energy input is paid for by the operator. Figure 18. Electrical engineering excludes the supersystem and its component interactions. Useful work output equals electrical energy from the power line minus losses and inefficiencies. Operator pays for it. Figure 19. Operation of the normal electrical power system. Useful work output equals electrical energy from solar cell array minus losses and inefficiencies. Operator pays nothing. Figure 20. Operation of the solar-powered electrical power system. Useful work output equals electrical energy from the power line plus heat energy from the atmosphere minus losses and inefficiencies. Figure 21. 2 reservoir representation of the common heat pump. Useful work output equals electrical energy from the power line plus negative electromagnetic energy from the vacuum and curved space-time minus losses and inefficiencies. Figure 22. Operation of the invention in coefficient of performance greater than 1 but less than infinite mode. Useful work output equals negative electromagnetic energy from the vacuum and curved space-time minus losses and inefficiencies. Figure 23. Operation of the invention in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Negative energy pulses in from environment. Negative electromagnetic energy converges rather than diverges. Amplification effect in resistance, inductance, and capacitive sections. Note, strong gradients are known to disobey the second law of thermodynamics. Figure 24. Mechanism for amplification of negative energy flow in impedance sections, for sharp gradients. Figure 25. Typical elements that have impedance and exhibit amplification of negative energy flow, for sharp gradients. Figure 26. Inductance coupled impedance matching trigger device. Figure 27. Pulse outputs from the oscillator trigger unit. Figure 28. Free-running 555 timing circuit. Figure 29. High voltage switching, energy amplification and battery charging operation. Figure 30. High voltage switching across the battery in floating ground situation. Figure 31. Scheme for battery charging from an environmental high voltage source. 200 feet antenna 30 feet off the earth. Figure 32. External elevated antenna for negative energy charging of batteries. Figure 33. Full diagram of the radiant energy charger using an silicon controlled rectifier. Figure 33. Full diagram of the radiant energy charger using an silicon controlled rectifier. Figure 34. Radiant energy powering of the monopole motor. Figure 34. Radiant energy powering of the monopole motor. Figure 35. Using earth cells with a potential switch and a trigger. Figure 36. The invention shown as an inverted potential switch. Section 1, Background Information. 1.0 Introduction. Because of the novel nature of the invention and its use of a unified field theory of electrodynamics, the active vacuum and local curvatures of space-time participate and interact with the system in a manner which cannot be assumed to be a net zero. Indeed, the major object of the invention is precisely to engineer and alter the active vacuum environment, engineer and alter the local curvatures of space-time, and take advantage of the ensuing energy exchange between these active environments and the system, in order to provide a system far from equilibrium in said active environments, with the system freely receiving and utilizing excess energy from them, both in conventional positive energy form and unconventional negative energy form. The operation of the invention is not described in terms of just conventional electrical engineering and classical electrodynamics alone. Instead, the physics of the active vacuum and its interactions with charged matter are involved, as well as the physics of curved space-time and its interactions with charged matter. The invention also exploits a unique discovery. Using sharp gradients and sharp pulses, the invention stimulates receipt of negative electromagnetic energy from the vacuum. Further, the only limit on how much negative electromagnetic energy can be stimulated and received in the system is the sharpness and peak intensity of the gradient, plus the frequency of producing the gradient, plus the ability of the circuitry to catch and store the negative energy in capacitors, thereby converting the energy into positive energy. In stimulating the negative energy inflow into the system from the sharply perturbed vacuum, a novel way of utilizing the Dirac is stimulated and employed. Some special characteristics of negative energy are given, as well as some of the special interactions in normal circuitry. We have nominated negative energy as also what astrophysicists call dark energy and sometimes quintessence, and explained why. Every university teaches the Poynting energy flow theory, which only considers a minute fraction of the energy flow generated through space outside the circuit conductors, specifically, the traction that actually gets diverged into conductors to potentialize the Drude electron gas. When the huge additional heaviside component of energy flow in curl form, present but non-diverged, and arbitrarily discarded by Lorentz, is accounted, then the electromagnetic negative dark energy produced in sharp Strophi cycle gradients is sufficient to cause the widespread anti-gravity that is accelerating the expansion of the universe. It is odd that astrophysicists are looking as deeply into the early universe in the sky as can be seen, intensely searching for dark energy, when it can readily be found right on the bench and used in any circuit with slight modifications, by utilizing the novel techniques of the present invention. Accordingly, this section briefly summarizes the necessary additional background required from particle physics, quantum field theory, Dirac theory, quantum mechanics, and higher group symmetry electrodynamics, and includes appropriate literature citations. Since the invention uses field energy in mass-free space, wherein said field in the absence of mass is not a force field, we shall refer to energy in that massless, force-free state as radiant energy. Note that radiant energy is not electric field energy or magnetic field energy, because the electric and magnetic are force fields, actually, force field point intensities, rigorously defined only in charged mass and not in free space. Radiant energy is the force-free field energy in space, and may consist of either positive or negative energy or a mix of both. In short, the invention deliberately engineers the precursor force-free fields, which are naught but curvatures of space and simultaneously asymmetries in the local virtual particle flux of vacuum, prior to their interactions with charged mass to form force fields E and B in said charged mass. Changes of radiant energy do change the energy density of local vacuum and of local spacetime, hence, they directly and simultaneously alter the local vacuum dynamics as well as the local spacetime curvature dynamics. Changes of radiant energy in space are force-free and hence work-free, and they are more properly referred to as asymmetrical Riga-Eugene, already known to be work-free due to the gauge freedom axiom of quantum field theory, also used in gauge field theory and even to regauge the classical Maxwell-Heaviside electrodynamics for simpler equations easier to solve. In this section, we explain these novelties as they are used in the invention, and also include the solution to the long, vexing source charge problem. This solution was derived by one of the inventors, Bearden, and has been published in several refereed journals in 2000 and subsequently. The result of the invention is a novel way to utilize electrical circuits, initiating them to rather freely receive excess negative energy from their active vacuum and curved space-time environments, utilize impedances as amplifiers, transduce the received negative energy into positive energy by quick, charging capacitors and batteries with the negative energy, and then utilize this excess positive energy for useful purposes such as powering electrical systems and their loads. The result of the free interchange of energy between the active environment and the circuit or system is to provide the free input of excess negative electromagnetic energy to the circuit from said active environment, and transduction of the excess electromagnetic negative energy into normal stored electromagnetic energy, thence dissipating said excess positive energy in loads, allowing coefficient of performance greater than 1 operation analogous to that of a common heat pump. Also, by including the small input positive energy, necessary to initiate the negative energy entry, as part of the system output load, the invention accomplishes controlled positive feedback and allows coefficient of performance equal to infinity in the manner of a solar cell array in its external solar radiation environment, wherein according to the invention, all positive energy dissipated as system input, output, or losses actually is received from the vacuum in the form of negative electromagnetic energy. Again we accent that, even in a solar cell, it is unknown but true that the energy from the space-time environment is in field-free precursor form, and only becomes electromagnetic force field energy when said entering precursor energy interacts with charged mass in said solar cell. All sections of a circuit that alter the electron mass current thereby affect and alter the effects of the precursor's energy interaction with the charged mass. In short, one can manipulate all parts of a circuit, other than a theoretically perfect conductor section without impedance whatsoever, so as to manipulate the precursor radiant energy interaction with charged mass, to further form additional electromagnetic force field energy in the circuit. This is a totally different function and capability than has previously been advanced in any other invention. Positive energy flow encountering an impedance element in a circuit encounters positive impedance, such as the notion of positive resistance or positive reciter, resulting in energy outflow losses. Negative energy flow encountering an impedance element in a circuit encounters negative impedance, such as the notion of negative resistance or negative resistor, resulting in energy inflow gains. The excess negative energy inflowing into the impedance region of a circuit comes freely from the external environment. This effect is herein called environmental amplification or EAMP for short. Therein lies one of the greatest discoveries and applications of the invention. We explain further, positive energy flow is innately divergent, or scattering, away from the line of flow and into the external environment, outward and away from the line of propagation. Accordingly, a pure conductor must act as an inverse waveguide to hold the energy in along the line of propagation down the conductor, in order to prevent the divergence and scattering of the energy out of the system and into the external environment as system losses. Any impedance in the circuitry path reduces the conductance and thereby reduces that holding in, and so in fact diverges and scatters some of the flowing positive energy out of the system, thereby generating the system losses. Positive energy flowing through real circuitry, which will have some impedance, a priori has some of the energy diverged or lost from the flow and scattered out into the environment. Hence less positive energy flow is output by the system as useful work, than is input to it from all sources. Negative energy is innately convergent, or inflowing, from the external environment into the propagation path, and the conductor must act to hold back the excess negative energy inflow, that is constantly trying to inflow from the external environment. Any impedance in the propagation path through the circuitry will reduce holding back of the negative energy trying to inflow from the external environment. Negative energy flowing through circuitry with successive impedances has additional negative energy additions that inflow from the external environment at those impedances. Hence more negative energy flow is output by the normal system circuitry than is input to it by the design input point or section, the excess being freely furnished by the EAMP effect. By using the negative energy output to charge a proper accumulator, such as a capacitor or battery, it is changed into positive energy. The positive energy storage can then be dissipated to produce more useful work than the energy input by the operator, the excess energy having been freely received from the active environment. In a positive energy system, the system dissipates energy into the active environment. In a negative energy system, the environment dissipates negative energy into the system. To increase the available flow of positive energy through a real system, one reduces the serial impedances of the system. To increase the available flow of negative energy through a real system, one increases the serial impedances of the system. The invention exploits this property in a novel manner by deliberately causing negative energy to interact with impedance circuit elements. It thus amplifies flowing radiant energy by creating conditions that stimulate the inflow of excess negative energy from the active external environment. The invention does this by means of asymmetrical regauging. According to the gauge freedom principle of quantum field theory, gauge field theory and even common electrodynamics, asymmetrical Riga-Eugene never requires work since force is not involved. Thus, the invention achieves energy amplification via asymmetrical Riga-Eugene, without the expenditure of work. We discuss gauge freedom and the definition of work in greater detail later in section 1. So a novel feature of the invention is its special use of all impedance sections, capacitive, inductive, and resistive sections, of normal circuitry as negative energy flow amplification sections or E-amp sections, thereby further increasing the input and interaction of negative energy into the system from the local vacuum environment. In this manner most of the circuitry of the invention functions as a series of negative impedances, each further amplifying the available negative energy flowing in the system and available for charging batteries or capacitors. The charged batteries or capacitors then transform the collected negative energy into positive energy. In addition to the inductive and resistive sections of the system, this novel feature of the invention includes the altering of the local vacuum inside a capacitor or battery being charged by the process, so that a further amplified entry of negative energy into the system occurs from this localized region of the vacuum inside said capacitor or battery. Figures 17 to 25 are provided to illustrate the conceptual material of Section 1, Background Information. Figures 26 to 35 further illustrate the invention in detail. Figure 17 on page 37 shows the relationship of the three components of the supersystem. Figure 18 on page 38 shows that the standard electrodynamics and electrical engineering model assumes away the active vacuum and active curved spacetime of the supersystem, thereby assuming away the very function and processes that present invention initiates and applies. Figure 19 on page 38 shows coefficient of performance less than 1 operation of a normal electrical power system. Figure 20 on page 39 shows the operation of a solar-powered electrical power system in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Figure 21 on page 39 shows the two reservoir representation of the common home heat pump's operation. Figure 22 on page 40 shows the diagrammatic operation of the invention in coefficient of performance greater than 1 mode, and figure 23 on page 40 shows the diagrammatic operation of the invention in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Figure 24 on page 41 shows a mechanism for amplification of negative energy flow in impedance sections, for sharp gradients. Figure 25 on page 41 shows typical circuit elements that have impedance and exhibit amplification of negative energy flow, for sharp gradients. On radiant energy, its nature and novel characteristics. Flaws in the electrical power engineering model. Figure 17 shows a supersystem model, which more accurately depicts how nature is organized. Figure 17 also shows the interactions between vacuum, curved spacetime, and physical system that do occur. The supersystem consists of the physical system and its dynamics, the active local vacuum and its dynamics, and the active local curvatures of spacetime and their dynamics. Dynamics as used herein generally refers to some pattern of changes over time. The physical system and its dynamics are observable. The other two supersystem components, the active local vacuum and its dynamics and the active local curvatures of spacetime and their dynamics, are not observable. In the supersystem model, cause arises from the two non-observable components. The familiar observable changes in the physical system reflect the effects. Now compare figure 17 to figure 18. Figure 18 shows that the standard electrical power engineering, EPE, model assumes a flat local spacetime and an inert vacuum. Flat local spacetime has been falsified by general relativity since 1916. Inert vacuum has been falsified since the 1920s by particle physics. Moreover, electrical power engineering assumes no input of negative energy. This can also be a false assumption, since negative energy has been known in physics, but misused or not used at all, since Dirac's theory of the electron in 1928 to 1930. These three erroneous assumptions eliminate from the electrical power engineering model any effects of the local standard environment. In short, electrical power engineering severely mutilates the supersystem of figure 17, erroneously assuming no extra energy can be received via Riga-Eugene. Nevertheless, all changes to the observed physical system and its dynamics actually do result from the ongoing interactions between the physical system and the non-observable supersystem components 1 and 3. The entropic electrical power engineering model thus assumes away the precursors of force, and thus assumes away the possibility of engineering those precursors. Hence it assumes away a whole technology, negentropic engineering. The present invention is perhaps the first invention to deliberately evoke and utilize just such negative entropy engineering, a major technology that has been neglected and bypassed by science since the beginning. The electrical power engineering model thus focuses on the system and its observable effects dynamics, and depends for its applicability on Lorentz symmetrical regauging of the Maxwell-Heaviside equations, as self-enforced by the ubiquitous closed current loop circuit. In short, the electrical power engineering model is useful and describes nature with sufficient approximation only when the net negentropic effects of supersystem component interactions are made negligible. Its great disadvantage is that it foists coefficient of performance less than 1 electromagnetic systems upon the world community, always thirsting for combustion of fuel, consumption of fuel rods, etc., and causing the great disruption and poisoning of the planet with energy byproducts and resultants. Vacuum empty space is highly energetic. Contrary to usual electrical power engineering, in modern physics empty mass-free space, which includes the active vacuum, is a very energetic and dynamic medium. It has to be, since it contains the set of all causes and their dynamics, the causative dynamics, which when interacted with mass, will and do generate all observed forces and all observed changes in the physical system. Any change in the vacuum, whether a force field, potential, wave, or energy flow movement, energy flow, thus involves the dynamics of this vacuum medium itself. As Davies expresses it, what might appear to be empty space is, therefore, a seething ferment of virtual particles. A vacuum is not inert and featureless, but alive with throbbing energy and vitality. A real particle such as an electron must always be viewed against this background of frenetic activity. When an electron moves through space, it is actually swimming in a sea of ghost particles of all varieties, virtual leptons, quarks, and messengers, entangled in a complex melee. The presence of the electron will distort this irreducible vacuum activity, and the distortion in turn reacts back on the electron. Even at rest, an electron is not at rest, it is being continually assaulted by all manner of other particles from the vacuum. In terms of space-time curvature, Evans expresses it beautifully as follows. In standard Maxwell-Heaviside theory, the electromagnetic field is thought of as propagating in a source-free region in flat space-time where there is no curvature. If, however, there is no curvature, the electromagnetic field vanishes. Empirical evidence refutes the Maxwell-Heaviside theory. In general relativity, if there is mass or charge anywhere in the universe, then the whole of space-time is curved, and all the laws of physics must be written in curved space-time, including, of course, the laws of electrodynamics. Seen in this light, the O3 electrodynamics of Evans and the homomorphic SU2 electrodynamics of Barrett are written correctly in conformally curved spacetime, and are particular cases of Einstein's general relativity as developed by Sachs. Flat spacetime, as assumed in classical U1 electrodynamics, as the description of the vacuum is valid only when the whole universe is empty. This invention utilizes energy in the radiant, mass-free, force-free form that energy takes in space, in the virtual particle flux of the vacuum and curvature of spacetime, prior to its interaction with mass, prior to observation, to form force. The invention uses both electromagnetic positive energy and electromagnetic negative energy, with special emphasis on the use of electromagnetic negative energy. The invention operates in the non-observable virtual state causative energy realm as well as in the observable state mass system effects energy realm. Specifically, the invention operates in and upon the precursors that generate forces in and of charged masses. It operates and functions in that area where net negentropic mutual interactions of the three supersystem components need not be and are not negligible, but to the contrary, are eagerly sought and maximized. Modern view of force. Mass is a component of force. By the definition, force equals change of momentum over time, where momentum equals mass multiplied by velocity. There are no force fields in mass-free space, contrary to the assumptions of classical electromagnetism that such force fields do exist in empty space. The force field in space notion was a result of the original Maxwellian assumption of the material ether, so that mass was thought to be everywhere present. In that case, the force field in space would be the force field in material ether. The equations assume this and still do, since they were never changed after the Michelson-Morley experiments destroyed the material ether prior to 1900. Modern particle physics already treats all forces of nature as being generated by the interaction of virtual particle flux upon observable mass and charge, and therefore generated by interaction of a precursor. The force prior to observation is that ongoing four-space interaction of four-space precursor and three-space mass. The virtual particle flux with its dynamics and its associated space-time curvature dynamics is the causative precursor to force and force field. The activity of the virtual particle flux of the vacuum is a known precursor to generating force itself, in and on the mass with which it interacts. Once the forces are generated, the changes caused by forces to the observable mass and observable charge are measurable, but not the causative virtual particle flux dynamics, the active precursor causes, themselves. Observed force is an effect of the precursor interactions with mass and charge. Only effects are observed, not primary causes. The precursors themselves can be directly engineered and manipulated, before they have interacted with charged mass, and then interacted to create freely altered forces and force fields E and B, and D and H. This is actually a previously unrecognized principle of nature. Forces may be manipulated and engineered in force-free fashion by directly manipulating their force-free precursors. This manipulation may be considered Riga-Eugeing. It is work-free under the gauge freedom law of physics. In this invention, the precursors are freely engineered, that is, work-free by simple Riga-Eugeing and then allowed to interact with masses to produce altered forces that do actual work. Thus, useful work can now be produced with free Riga-Eugeing energy, and with little or no energy directly furnished by the operator himself. There is no conservation of work law in nature, instead, there is a conservation of energy law. Work is a change of form of energy, it is not change of magnitude of energy. Instead, all the energy necessary to perform the work, that is, to have its form changed, can be received by the system from the engineered precursors in the local vacuum and local curvatures of space-time. The invention is in fact the first concrete and practical step in real electromagnetic systems along the direction of vacuum engineering, envisioned by Nobelist Lee. In that sense, the invention is a pioneering invention. An electromagnetic circuit or system in fact requires a unified field theory for analysis. Quoting Evans, this fundamental result of differential geometry implies that electromagnetic energy can be transmitted from a source to a receiver by scalar curvature R, and that electromagnetic energy is available in non-Euclidean spacetime. All fields in nature are fundamentally dependent upon, and originate in, scalar curvature R. The charge obtainable from a given curvature R in a given volume is about 12 orders of magnitude greater than the mass obtainable from the same curvature R for the same volume. The electromagnetic energy from non-Euclidean spacetime is available to the earthbound engineer in usable form, and originates in the curvatures inherent in the rest of the universe. The charge and concomitant electromagnetic energy available from curvature induced by mass is amplified by about 12 orders of magnitude. In the invention, the input energy is largely received in the form of negative energy, so much of the heating, friction, fuel consumption, etc. that accompanies presently utilized mechanisms for energizing working systems with positive energy can be eliminated, particularly as the technology of this invention is steadily developed. As shown by Einstein, Wheeler, Evans and many others, modern general relativity treats the forces of nature as being generated by local curvatures of space-time interacting with observable mass and charge. Energy identically is curvature of space-time. Further, change of magnitude of energy and therefore change of curvature, that is Riga-Yujiing, is work-free since change of space-time curvature is simply Riga-Yujiing. Curvature of space-time is taken as the precursor that interacts with mass to generate force in and of mass systems. The changes to the observable mass and observable charge are measurable, but the causative curvatures of space-time themselves are not measurable. Only effects are observed, not causes. Again, the curved space-time precursors are directly engineered and manipulated by the present invention, before they have interacted with charged mass to create forces and force fields E and B, and H. Hence the energizing or potentializing process for working system has been fundamentally altered to mostly employ a direct application of gauge freedom. Precursors and their dynamics, directly engineered by the invention, rigorously are what energy identically is. As we discuss later, this is actually the first formal and testable definition of energy itself, and the invention therefore is a new method for directly engineering causative energy itself. Since in any local curvature induced by local mass there is some 12 orders of spatial energy greater than the energy locked mass, there is some 12 orders of spatial energy greater than the energy locked in the mass itself, then in a local system or device there is no shortage of the available space-time curvature energy available to be precursor engineered. Herein we refer to this precursor or enormous basic electromagnetic energy of curved space-time as radiant energy. A given exact pattern and dynamics of radiant energy will also be referred to as a causative engine or just as an engine where it is understood that a non-material asymmetric gauge freedom engine is being utilized. For any physical system and its forces and functions, any whatsoever, there is an exact and specific engine interacting with the masses of that system, at every level, to generate the forces at every level that drive the dynamics of said physical system at all levels. The invention is believed to be the first to deliberately engineer and manipulate the precursor engine itself, in this case the engine of an electrical power system, so that the power system becomes a coefficient of performance greater than one power system without the operator himself having to pay to furnish the excess energy. Instead, the environment, space-time and virtual particle flux of the vacuum, is freely engineered or specifically Riga-Yujied to freely furnish the extra potential energy to the working power system via a form of free Riga-Yujiing. It follows that, by deliberately manipulating the precursors, the virtual particle flux itself, which also simultaneously manipulates the local curvature of space-time itself, then the future forces subsequently develop on a mass or charge by the interaction of that manipulated virtual particle flux are also being engineered in advance and for free. The causes are being directly manipulated and engineered, not the effects. Directly freely changing the precursor causes also changes their subsequent interactions on the physical system to produce observed real physical effects such as the forces driving the system. A system exhibiting forces is actually existing in a non-inertial frame, thus in a precursor engine of curvatures of space-time and altered virtual particle fluxes of the vacuum. Hence the most direct form of engineering is to directly and asymmetrically engineer the precursors themselves. The reason is that such engineering is force-free a priori, and therefore requires no force multiplied by distance work, or, in the real world, requires only a little work for switching and control. One merely alters patterns of potential energy, which is a set of specific asymmetrical Riga-Yujiings and therefore free under the well-known gauge freedom axiom of physics. The invention expands and makes concrete the very notion of Riga-Yujiing and gauge freedom. The invention also significantly expands the very concepts of power system engineering and electrical power production. Engineering the effects versus engineering the causes. The conventional engineering method is to assume use of a given observable effect forces to further manipulate observable mass and charge and their concomitant fields. The invention, however, manipulates the non-observable causative precursor agents themselves, virtual particle flux and curvature of local space-time in a pre-engineered operation, thereby freely altering the forces that the altered causative agents will produce in their subsequent interactions with the mass system. It appears that no such direct manipulation of the pre-force or force field free precursor agents in space, that is, Space-time itself and the virtual particle flux of vacuum itself has been previously utilized in electrical engineering, battery charging, or powering electrical systems, or for that matter, in any other field of engineering. Contrary to an elementary physics book, mass is a component of force, and this has long been known to leading physicists such as Feynman, Wheeler, etc. There is no force without the interaction of a non-mass causative agent, curvature of spacetime, or virtual particle flux of the vacuum, and a mass. In short, force consists of the causative agent, the observable mass or charge, and the ongoing interaction of the two. Thus force identically is, and reveals, the presence of an ongoing force-free fundamental Riga-Eugene process acting on a mass or charge. It has no existence at all without the presence and interaction of all three items, the active force-free precursor, mass and charge, and their ongoing interaction. This allows to the problem posed by Feynman as to the unfathomable nature of force, when he stated, one of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin, and this is not just a definition. If you insist upon a precise definition of force, you will never get it. Feynman's dismay is because the conventional mechanics notion of a separate massless force acting upon a mass is totally false. There is no such thing as a massless force, because the phrase itself is an oxymoron. However, now force does have a precise definition, once the supersystem dynamics are considered and not just the system dynamics. Force may be precisely defined as the presence of an engine interacting with a mass, including charged mass, to produce changes to said mass or charged mass, including all the masses and charges of a system. As an ongoing process, the production of force process is subject to direct, work-free pre-engineering of its non-mass causative precursor component. Changing the non-observable, causative component does not necessarily require work, because no observable load is being affected or powered. Also, no force yet even exists, so precursor engineering does not involve work W from translating the ongoing process F through distance S, via the equation work equals force multiplied by distance. Thus, the accepted principles of gauging and gauge freedom are applied and extended to allow a powerful and novel pre-engineering capability using deliberate combinations of asymmetrical regauging. The work-free energy is indeed changed freely, but conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed, because the excess energy is freely received from the active environment. In the modern physics view, the Hori mechanics notion that a separate massless force field is space acts independently upon a separate mass is false, since the term massless force field is an oxymoron a priori. As is well known in foundations work, no force field exists as such in empty space, from first principles. As Feynman states, in dealing with force, the tacit assumption is always made that the force is equal to zero unless some physical body is present. One of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin. Jackson in fact is aware of this fact in classical electrodynamics, and states how it is ignored by electrodynamicists. Quoting, most classical electrodynamicists continue to adhere to the notion that the electromagnetic force field exists as such in the vacuum, but do admit that physically measurable quantities such as force somehow involve the product of charge and field. Although most electrodynamicists ignore it, for some decades foundation physicists such as Feynman have been aware that the field in space and the potential in space are force-free a priori. Hence changing them is or can be work-free also, being mere asymmetrical Riga-Eugene. The standard gauge freedom principle of physics guarantees this work-free engineering capability to affect and change at will the precursor to force, hence changing the precursor to the production of work as force translated through a distance. Note that force-free engineering of the precursors, the active vacuum and curvatures of space-time, is negentropic. That is, no work is done, and an additional ordering of some volumetric energy is achieved. This Riga-Eugene changing the magnitude of the local energy, though not its form by disequilibrium energy flow, is work-free and permissibly violates the present statement of the second law which requires equilibrium. Also, the Riga-Eugene requires a slight correction to the present first law of thermodynamics, which has heretofore been incorrectly stated. Work rigorously is the change of form of energy, not the change of magnitude of energy as is assumed by the first law for change of an external parameter of a system such as its potential and potential energy. The first law thus requires this slight correction, since as presently written it specifically prohibits regauging. As an example, doubling the voltage on a system where no extra current is allowed, freely doubles the collected potential energy in the system. This increase in the magnitude of an external parameter, the voltage, is work-free and is mere regauging, so long as the energy is input in the same form as is the external parameter. In the example, no extra power is required, because no extra current is allowed, hence no extra work is required. The additional implications for thermodynamics are intense. This work-free engineering of the precursor to force and work is long missing half of the present second law of thermodynamics. It allows negative entropy production and engineering as force-free and work-free engineering of the precursors to the forces and force fields in affected matter. We have previously shown the source charge's total violation of the second law of thermodynamics, and we include a necessary restatement of the second law in this paper. The overly restrictive classical second law is already under intense attack and falsification, theoretically and experimentally, by leading thermodynamicists anyway. That work is briefly summarized and referenced in this section. Further, thermodynamics is recognized to have a fundamental time asymmetry problem, due to overly restricted second law, which presently permits only positive entropy for a given system as time passes. That is falsified by every charge in the universe, which continuously produces negative entropy in accordance with the proof by Evans and Rondini that in theory such systems are possible. Hence, one of the novel things involved in the invention is the permissible violation of the equilibrium second law of thermodynamics in somewhat ordinary-looking electrical power system circuits, using novel far from equilibrium operations that engineer the precursor energy prior to the appearance, in and on and of mass, of the resulting forces themselves. What has been achieved is this: force, so long regarded as primary in engineering, is not primary after all. Instead, asymmetrical regauging and engines are primary, since engineering them is work-free, yet such engineering freely alters the subsequent forces that are produced in the system and that perform dynamics and work. Difference between field and intensity. Feynman also stated it even more clearly: we may think of electric field in spacetime and magnetic field in spacetime as giving the forces that would be experienced at the time t by a charge located at x, y, z, with the condition that placing the charge there did not disturb the positions or motion of all the other charges responsible for the fields. However, as previously stated, neither electric or magnetic field in space is a force field, contrary to the assumptions of the electrical power engineering model. In fact, neither electric nor magnetic is the volumetric field in space or in mass. Instead, in electrodynamics E and B in space are actually the point intensities of the associated volumetric fields, as determined by reaction cross-section of a unit point static charge, once charge and mass are physically present. Simply check the standard textbook definition of the fields. When a unit point static charge is placed at a point in the field, what gets scattered from the field is assumed to determine the intensity of the field at that point. Similarly, for the potentials Fe and A, the Fe and A actually used in the models are not the potentials per southeast, but only an indication of their respective point intensities as determined by unit point static charge. For magnetic fields, of course, a unit point north pole is in fact a unit point magnetic charge. Definition of force. As can be seen from Feynman's cogent statement, if the charged mass, being operated upon in a force, is removed, there is no force remaining, even though the mass-free fields and their intensity are still present. The field as it exists in space has no observable mass, and hence no observable force. The fact that mass is a component of force can further be seen from the definition of force F as force equals change of momentum equals the rate of change of speed multiplied by mass plus the rate of change of mass multiplied by speed. As can be seen, both terms of the rightmost expansion include a mass term. Hence mass is a component of the non-relativistic part of force F and the rate of change of mass is a component of the relativistic part of force F. We repeat that electrodynamicists and electrical engineers do not actually calculate the electric field or the magnetic field as such anyway, but only the point intensities of their consistent energy flows, as determined by an interacting unit point static charge assumed to be at every point in space occupied by the field or potential. The point intensity of the electromagnetic energy flows comprising a single field or a single potential is most certainly not the field or the potential itself, nor is it the magnitude of the potential or the field. However, most professors and electrical engineers simply use the common corrupted jargon and speak erroneously of calculating the field, and the magnitude of the field, without accurately pointing out that only the magnitude of the point intensity of the field in a precisely limited type of interaction with charged mass is being calculated, not the magnitude of the field itself. Both the field and potential are in fact sets of electromagnetic energy flows, longitudinal electromagnetic waves, as shown by Whittaker in 1903 and 1904. As a trivial example, from any fixed static non-zero field E, any amount of force F can be generated or collected on charges Q, by the simple equation force equals charge multiplied by electric field. All one needs is sufficient collecting charges Q, to obtain any amount of force F desired from a given E. Similarly, from a given non-zero potential difference V, any amount of electromagnetic energy W can be collected upon charges Q, by simple equation energy equals voltage multiplied by charge. The real reason such equations exist and are proper is that the isolated charge in classical electrodynamics is not isolated at all, but, in particle physics and quantum field theory, involves two infinite charges, two infinite energies, and their exchange. So from two associated infinite energy sources, obviously one can draw as much finite energy as one desires. Aspects of the present invention which take radiant energy, in negative energy form, directly from the earth itself, from a tree, etc. show that copious energy can be collected and received from very small potential differences. These aspects will demonstrate that such energy collection can be done by varying the example parameters, receiving the energy in negative energy form, freely amplifying the negative energy form, freely amplifying the negative energy in system impedances, and transducing the negative energy to normal positive energy. Radiant energy engineers the cause rather than the effect. Again, we shall speak of field or potential energy in its mass-free, force-free, spatial form, prior to observation, as radiant energy. In that sense, radiant energy engineering has to do with engineering the dynamics of the curvatures of space-time itself, general relativity view, or with engineering the dynamics of the virtual particle flux of vacuum itself, particle physics and quantum field theory view. Both precursors are engineered simultaneously by the invention, since a change in one changes the other also. The freely re-engineered precursors then interact with charged mass to generate real forces, which can be very powerful and dynamic, yet initiated by very minuscule control and switching energy during the precursor engineering phase. The reason why a minuscule quantity of control and switching energy furnished by the operator is able to obtain large forces able to do great amount of work is that the invention's special circuitry uses the minuscule quantity of energy to create conditions enabling the collection of larger quantities of energy from the environment. Even that minuscule quantity of initiating energy can then be taken from the system's positive energy output, by use of clamped and governed positive feedback. In that case, the system is said to be self-powering. Actually it is powered completely by energy freely received from the external active environment. By dealing with the radiant energy of the causative field or potential existing in space, and in the virtual particle flux of the vacuum, prior to observation, prior to interaction with mass, the invention works directly with and on the massless forceless field itself, before real force has been produced in a subsequent interaction of the field's intensity with mass. The invention thus interacts with and processes the non-observable causative massless field and the causative massless potential themselves. The invention is thus a causative engine as defined previously herein. Nevertheless, when one changes the force-free field without work, one has changed the subsequent work that the field will generate when it later interacts with the charged mass of the physical system. Again, energy is conserved, but work alone need not be conserved. There is no conservation of work law in nature, instead, only the energy need be conserved. The entire radiant energy approach is to get the environment to freely furnish the necessary energy, or most of it, in advance, thereby changing the energy of the fields and thus changing the fields themselves, prior to their interaction with mass to produce work in the system. In short, this is the mechanism for producing a special kind of non-equilibrium steady-state supersystem, one in which the active vacuum environment and local curvatures of space-time furnish all or most of the excess field energy and potential energy that appears in the system. Thermodynamical non-equilibrium steady-state system is theoretically permitted to exhibit continuous negative entropy in the physical system itself, while rigorously obeying the conservation of energy law. The excess ordered energy is furnished by the pre-force active vacuum flux environment. This radiant energy process is also the major mechanism for directly engineering the active environment, active vacuum and curvatures of local space-time itself, carrying out Nobelist Lee's insight that someday a future technology might somehow enable direct engineering of the vacuum. Further, force is an observable, because it includes change in the state of observable mass. Force is an effect of a more fundamental ongoing process, interaction of the vacuum and curved space-time with mass and charge. Force does not exist as such in empty space prior to the observation, in accord with Nobelist Feynman's succinct explanation. Radiant energy engineering is a method for freely changing the pre-force causative agent. The agent then interacts with charged mass to produce changed electromagnetic forces. It is appropriate to recognize that there has previously been no adequate definition of energy. As Feynman bluntly states, it is important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. From the viewpoint of radiant energy, local energy is any change in the local virtual particle flux of the vacuum, or any change in the curvature of local space-time. It therefore is any change in the precursor to force, whether or not the precursor interacts with mass and charge to produce force and work. Immediately one notes that this first formal definition of energy includes both positive energy and negative energy. A space-time curvature may be either positive or negative, and the flux of vacuum may increase or decrease in intensity. The field and the potential are volumetric regional changes in the local virtual particle flux of the vacuum, as well as regional changes in the curvature of local space-time. Again, neither E or B are actually fields per southeast, instead, they are point intensities of the fields, based on a static reaction cross-section assumption. An example of radiant energy engineering is the universally accepted asymmetrical Riga-Eugene, where the potential, and thus the potential electromagnetic energy of a system is freely changed, in accord with the gauge freedom principle of quantum field theory used by all electrodynamicists. Gauge freedom, including asymmetrical freedom as well as symmetrical freedom, is equivalent to the statement that no work is done when only the voltage potential, and thus potential energy of a circuit is changed without concomitant current flow occurring in the circuit. Voltage is not work, and change of voltage alone is not work and does not require work. As Davies states, the gauge transformation in electrodynamics correspond to changes in voltage from place to place. As previously stated, Riga-Eugene is work-free. By Riga-Eugene, one does not have to furnish all the energy itself to the system oneself. Instead, the active environment is happy to furnish all the energy one requires, if one asks politely and properly. We also recognize that electromagnetic field energy and electromagnetic potential energy in nature exist as ongoing flow processes, as shown by Whittaker in two papers in 1903 and 1904. That is, any electromagnetic field and any electromagnetic potential can be decomposed in Whittaker fashion into internal sets of bidirection longitudinal electromagnetic wave pairs and different functions of these sets. The volumetric field and potential themselves are actually comprised of hidden electromagnetic energy flows, hence identically are sets of such hidden flows. Again, This explains one of the simplest but puzzling thermodynamic facts in electromagnetic theory. By changing the amount of charge Q available, any desired amount of electromagnetic potential energy can be collected from a given, fixed electromagnetic potential, say, of intensity Fe, from a single fixed source, on charges Q, by the simple equation energy equals charge multiplied by potential. If the collecting charges are static, no work is done in collecting as much energy as one wishes, from any finite static potential. Even from a small and fixed non-zero electrostatic scalar potential, one can collect as much energy as one wishes, given that one has enough collecting charges. The mere collection of the potential energy is asymmetrical Riga-Eugeing. It involves energy transfer only, and it is work-free thermodynamically. Similarly, given an unlimited availability of charge, any desired amount of electromagnetic electromotive force can be collected from a given, fixed electromagnetic force free field, say of intensity E on charge Q, by the equation force equals voltage multiplied by charge. Now either one accepts those experimentally verified and well-known simple electromagnetic equations, or one practices dogma rather than science. The equation tells us very clearly that from a single 12-volt battery one can obtain and collect all the potential energy and potential energy flow one wishes, and the energy can freely be transferred into a receiving charge system such as a special receiving circuit. Mere collection of a huge amount of energy from the continuous energy flow represented by the potential does not involve work. It has nothing at all to do with the ampere hours of the battery, etc. It simply has to do with having enough receiving charge that interacts with that 12-volt potential flowing onto the receiving circuit and potentializing the charges. Of course, one must strangle the current. The flow of current is directly part of power, which is the rate of performing work, which is the rate at which collected energy is being dissipated by the circuit. Current has nothing to do with the collection of electromagnetic energy into the circuit. It has to do with the dissipation of collected energy from that circuit. Obviously, something that is done in ordinary circuits ubiquitously negates this innate unlimited energy collection ability permitted by nature. That something is the use of the closed current loop circuit. Closing the loop is symmetric Riga-Eugeing. Symmetric Riga-Eugeing is what continually destroys the dipolar source of the potential energy. The radiant energy engineering principle is that the primary dipolar physical source of potential energy flow should not be connected into the common ground of the receiving and load circuit when appreciable current is flowing in the powering mode. Instead, the potential energy should be transferred from the source to the receiving circuit separately, in energy transfer asymmetric Riga-Eugeing mode only. Then the external dipolar source should be physically disconnected, at least from the common system ground, and the receiving circuit simultaneously revised to connect the load, free the now potentialized electrons, and allow the current to flow. In that way, free potential energy collected by the statically receiving circuit via gauge freedom is then dissipated by the separated dynamic circuit to power the loads and losses. None of the collected energy is dissipated to destroy the primary source dipolarity. Further, ideally the input energy should be in negative energy form, so that every element of the circuit having impedance acts as an amplifying negative impedance or E-amp to cause much more negative energy influx from the local active environment. Then the negative energy should be transduced by receiving circuitry so that normal powering of loads can be accomplished, with a little switching. Combining, there is two parts to the radiant energy engineering principle, a static part and a dynamic part. The static principle is, potentialize statically, depotentialize dissipate dynamically. By potentializing statically onto a substantial quantity of charge, even a small voltage can produce large amounts of collected electromagnetic field energy in the receiving circuit. Then by freeing the charges to flow as current, power appears. Potentialized current is driven through the load, dissipating that potential energy dynamically in the load, but with the original small voltage source disconnected. The dynamic principle is, potentialized dynamically by very sharp pulses so that negative energy inflow is copiously and freely produced. Direct this augmented negative energy pulse to a capacitive collector through a momentarily isolated circuit containing impedances, where the impedances act as negative energy amplifiers with excess energy furnished by immediate altered vacuum and curved spacetime. The isolation of the dynamic sharp gradient is achieved via manipulating the grounding, usually by floating the ground. We will further discuss the dynamic principle shortly. By use of radiant energy engineering principles, very large loads can be powered in iterative dynamic powering cycles interspersed by intermediate work-free collection of large amounts of regauging energy freely furnished by the active environment as excess negative energy inflow from the environment in a static collecting cycle. For continuous operation, one stores the regauging energy in multiple collectors, and iteratively switches the collectors to serve as the actual power source of the dynamic dissipation cycle. By the static principle, energy collection is accomplished in static, pure energy transfer regauging mode. Load powering is performed in a normal dynamic current mode by discharging from a collector the energy previously collected in static mode and transduced to positive energy. In this manner, energy from the completely free negative energy flow, extracted from the local vacuum, and triggered by any dipolar source can be utilized without destroying the source's dipolarity and its continuous flow of energy from the local vacuum. Radiant energy can consist of positive or negative energy or both. In nonlinear situations such as pulsing and sharp gradients, the Dirac must be specially considered since it is essentially the nascent vacuum prior to alteration, and it is appreciably altered by strong gradients. Sharply changing the local energy density, and space-time curvature, of the local vacuum can and will lift Dirac particles, particularly normal positive energy electrons, from the C, leaving behind the temporary presence and temporary persistence of unfilled Dirac holes, negative energy electrons, in Dirac's theory. During the sharp gradient of the pulse, the Dirac vacuum is made asymmetrical and dipolar, by separating holes from their normal occupying electrons. The asymmetrical vacuum becomes a source of excess negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials. As negative energy source charges, the temporarily persisting holes pour out negative electromagnetic energy transduced from their vacuum interaction, thereby forming negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials spreading in space at light speed. Since these negative energy force-free fields can also exist in space and can do interact with elements of the physical electromagnetic system and circuitry, then the term radiant energy may include both positive energy and negative energy, including negative energy electromagnetic fields and negative energy electromagnetic potentials. Radiant energy interaction and effects upon the physical system are thus far more complex than are specified in the electrical power engineering model. Additional physical phenomenology absent from the electrical power engineering model is present in radiant energy interactions. One strikingly unusual phenomenon commonly encountered in radiant energy engineering is the natural amplifying effect of impedances in the circuit, when negative energy from the environment impinges upon the impedances. One purpose of the invention is to take advantage of novel characteristics of radiant energy and its interactions for the direct extraction of electromagnetic energy from the vacuum by an initial or original source in energy flow form, and to utilize work-free energy transfer to collect usable electromagnetic energy in circuits via work-free asymmetrical regauging. Once the energy has been freely collected in the system from a given energy flow source, then that original source of potential may be disconnected, and the freely regauged collected excess potential energy of the circuit can be separately discharged into a load to power it. In this way, no back electromagnetic field effect is generated upon the original source of static potential during the powering cycle, because then the original source is not even connected to the common system ground. In short, the original source of potential can be used and reused to furnish potential, without degradation. This allows all back electromagnetic field in the discharging powering circuit to be completely isolated from the original source of potential energy flow. Hence, no back EMF work is done in the system by forcing current back through the original dipolar source of energy flow to destroy its dipolarity, thereby shutting off the free energy flow. The invention further takes advantage of the proven asymmetry of opposite charges, therefore of any dipolarity, which will continuously extract and output usable electromagnetic energy directly from the vacuum itself. The asymmetry of opposite charges has been proven in particle physics since 1957, but it still does not appear in the electrical power engineering model, since that model does not even include the active vacuum. Electrical power engineering also excludes the usage of negative energy charges, negative energy fields, and negative energy potentials. The result is that the invention uses methods and processes that convert an electromagnetic system or device into a non-equilibrium steady-state NES system, for either positive or negative energy or both, with accent on the negative energy. The system freely receives excess radiant energy from the altered active vacuum in virtual state form, coherently integrates that energy into real observable and usable electromagnetic field energy and potential energy, and then separately collects and discharges this excess observable electromagnetic energy in loads to obtain a coefficient of performance COP greater than 1. A device using this process can permissibly exhibit far more work output than the input energy component furnished by the operator himself, since now the local vacuum environment furnishes the additional energy input component required. By adding clamped and governed positive feedback from the positive energy system output to the operator's positive energy input section, a device using the process of the invention can also exhibit coefficient of performance equals to infinity, that is, so-called self-powering, which is powering by the environmental vacuum's energy input, analogous to how a solar cell is powered by its active solar radiation environment. Again, this active vacuum powering does not appear in the electrical power engineering model or in present electrical power system engineering practice. Efficiency versus coefficient of performance. The overall efficiency of the system is always less than 100%, and conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed. The new process, however, is analogous to that of a common home heat pump, which may have an efficiency of 50% so that half of all the total energy input to the heat pump is wasted. However, since in addition to operator's energy input there is an additional input of excess energy from the environment, the common heat pump in nominal conditions has a coefficient of performance equal to 3 to 4, even with only a 50% efficiency. Figure 21 on page 39 shows the nominal heat pump operation. The process utilized by the invention, figure 22 on page 40, operates in a fashion analogous to the home heat pump except that it uses excess electromagnetic energy, particularly negative energy, freely received from the local vacuum environment. Analogous to the common heat pump, in coefficient of performance greater than 1 operation the invention's process thus has two energy reservoirs, not just one. The two energy reservoirs from which input energy is received are the small amount of energy input by the operator himself and paid for by him, and the free excess energy input by the local vacuum environment. Although it remains a process where efficiency is less than 100%, this two-reservoir energy input process, where one reservoir contains extra energy freely made available from the environment, permits the system in figure 22 by the laws of physics and thermodynamics to exhibit coefficient of performance greater than 1 analogous to the heat pump, and even coefficient of performance equal to infinity, analogous to a solar cell in an environment of solar radiation as shown in figure 20. In coefficient of performance equal to infinity case, all the necessary input energy used by the system is furnished freely from the local vacuum environment. In that case, once the process is initiated and ongoing stably, the operator need furnish no additional energy at all, for the process to continue and perform useful work continuously in the manner of a windmill or solar cell array. Thus in figure 23 on page 40 the invention's coefficient of performance equals infinity self-powering operation is analogous to the operation of a windmill in a free wind, or a solar cell array in a solar radiation environment. Even with coefficient of performance equal to infinity, the efficiency is always less than 100%, for example, a very efficient windmill with coefficient of performance equal to infinity may have efficiency equal to 50% and waste half of all the energy input to it, and a solar cell with coefficient of performance equal to infinity may have efficiency equal to 17% and waste 83% of all the solar energy input to it. Coefficient of performance is defined as the energy or useful work output, divided by the operator's energy input only. If the operator inputs nothing while the environment does input all the energy, and if the machine produces any useful output at all, then the coefficient of performance equals to infinity, regardless of the fact efficiency is less than 100%. Conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed by both coefficient of performance less than infinity systems and coefficient of performance equal to infinity systems, as shown by efficiency less than 100% for coefficient of performance less than 1 operation, for coefficient of performance greater than 1 operation, and for coefficient of performance equal to infinity operation. All energy that is output by the system as useful work and system losses is in fact rigorously input to the system and to the process, by the active environment. The present invention has merely applied unconventional ways to receive the excess energy from the active virtual state energy vacuum environment itself, rather than from more conventional environments such as the windy atmosphere, temperature of the local air in the environment, or solar radiation. Some novel characteristics and actions of negative energy. Some novel characteristics of negative energy flow must be noted, particularly for impedance sections of the circuit that are independently grounded in floating ground fashion, and not tied to common ground in the closed current loop circuit. As previously explained, normal flow of electromagnetic positive energy, diverging energy, directed down a resistive or impedance wire results in scattering some of the positive energy flow out into the surrounding environment, so that some of the transferring energy flow is lost, scattered, to the environment en route to the load. This wastes that scattered energy as heat, in any system where the purpose is to pass the energy on down the wire for use elsewhere in the system. Positive energy is said to be heating energy. On the other hand, flow of electromagnetic negative energy, converging energy, through an impedance, such as a resistive wire, results in an exactly opposite and startling function. Reference is made to figure 24 on page 41, illustrating environmental amplification achieved by passing negative energy through an impedance. Excess negative electromagnetic energy is drawn into, converges into, the impedance from the external environment, increasing the overall negative energy flow, converging energy flow, down the wire, and cooling instead of heating. Hence negative energy is said to be cooling energy. In other words, any impedance becomes an amplifier for a sharply pulsed negative electromagnetic energy input, with the extra input negative energy for the amplification being freely furnished from the simultaneously pulsed external active vacuum environment. So this amplification of negative energy pulses is accomplished as pure regaugeing from the altered vacuum. Further, the action is free, due to the gauge freedom principle already recognized in gauge theory and quantum field theory. Thus, an impedance, or section of a circuit containing impedance, becomes an environmentally powered negative energy amplifier, a true negative impedance. We have called this action E-amplification or E-amp. The E-amp also exhibits cooling, and is useful in cooling circuits or refrigeration. In positive energy flow actions of normal electrical power engineering circuits, there is no parallel to this novel negative energy flow passive amplification action. Instead, positive energy circuits dissipate positive energy, dissipation being the exact opposite of amplification. One thus may regard the E-amp action as true negative resistance, for pulsed negative energy flow. Or more generally, as true negative impedance of any impedance section, for pulsed negative energy flow. Figure 25 on page 41 shows typical circuit and electrical power components that can exhibit the E-amp effect, for example, transformers, coils, capacitors, various motors, incandescent lights, resistors, batteries, transmission lines, and so forth. Through the use of strongly pulsed negative electromagnetic energy, the invention achieves environmental amplification of negative energy flows and their cooling effects, by circuit impedance components that would otherwise normally dissipate heat. Instead, now they concentrate additional negative energy from the environment. The excess negative energy is freely taken from the local vacuum via the negative impedance process and cooling induced by the converging function and behavior of pulsed negative energy flow. Excess energy converging and amplification effects exist for inductively coupled sections of a circuit, due to the negative resistance and negative inductance of inductors in negative energy flow. Hence an inductively coupled section of the invention, seemingly with a normal section efficiency of coefficient of performance less than 100% for positive energy, may and will become amp for negative energy and thereby actively produce coefficient of performance much greater than 1, utilizing the excess converging negative energy flowing in from the environment. Nonetheless, energy conservation is still rigorously obeyed. The excess negative energy does indeed enter the circuit via the negative impedance effect of the inductive coupling, from the second energy reservoir consisting of the negative energy of the altered local vacuum itself. Capacitive sections strongly pulsed with negative energy also develop the environmental amplification amp effect, particularly after some hours of use in such fashion. The amp effect appears to gradually condition the immediate active vacuum in which the capacitor or capacitive element is embedded, so that for large capacitances the electrical amplifier effect appears gradually after a lengthy time delay of a dozen or more hours. The strength of the electrical amplifier effect appears to increase in the presence of sharp gradient conditions, such as sharp pulse discharges. Such strong gradients are already known to violate the second law of thermodynamics, for example, though why they do so has not previously been established. We discovered that, for a finite time during the gradient, such discharges significantly affect, alter, and engineer the local vacuum and curve local space-time as well, producing a second negative energy reservoir of substantial negative energy fields and negative energy flow. The present classical second law of thermodynamics erroneously assumes a flat space-time and an inert vacuum, and the sharp gradient violates that assumption. Hence, the present second law fails for such situations, and a corrected statement of the second law is required. Such a corrected statement has been advanced by one of the present inventors, Bearden, and it is given later in this paper. The analysis of the present invention's operation must thus take into account such novel effects of negative energy, the uses of which are part of the claims of the invention. These novel functions of the invention are not present in conventional electrical engineering, but are indicated as possibilities, though never before systematically exploited in physics and forefront thermodynamics. We now give some additional background necessary for understanding energy from the vacuum, by presenting the solution to the problem of the source charge. The source charge and its associated fields and potentials. The source charge problem. Since stated, the connection between the field and its source has always been and still is the most difficult problem in classical and quantum electrodynamics. The source charge problem is rarely stated explicitly. Bungay expresses it as follows: in order to keep Maxwell's second-order equations and at the same time discard its advanced solutions is a consistent way one must add the hypothesis that the charged bodies are the sources of the electromagnetic field, a hypothesis that is taken so much for granted that it is hardly stated explicitly. Further, Bungay really states that, it is not usually acknowledged that electrodynamics, both classical and quantal, are in a sad state. Kosyakov states the source charge problem bluntly: a generally acceptable, rigorous definition of radiation has not as yet been formulated. The recurring question has been, why is it that an electric charge radiates but does not absorb light waves despite the fact that the Maxwell equations are invariant under time reversal? Electrical power engineers have little inkling that their electromagnetic model assumes every charge in the universe continuously emits real electromagnetic energy without any electromagnetic energy input. It is little wonder that such a formidable problem with the Maxwell-Heaviside theory, total violation of the conservation of energy law by every charge and every electromagnetic field, potential, and joule of electromagnetic energy, merely by its very existence, has been expunged from the textbooks. Until electrical engineers find, and incorporate in the electrical power engineering model, how non-observable energy is input to a charge so that the charge can integrate it into real energy and constantly re-emit real, observable electromagnetic fields, potentials, and their joules of electromagnetic energy in their circuits actually come from. In short, not a single electrical engineering department presently understands what really furnishes the electromagnetic energy to an electromagnetic circuit, or where the energy comes from, or how. None ever has. Yet, the basis for the answer has been in particle physics since 1957 and the proof of the asymmetry of opposite charges. Setting up the solution to the source charge problem. Electromagnetic radiation is emitted by a source such as a charge or a dipole. To solve the source charge problem, we first apply the quantum field theory model, where any isolated charge also polarizes its surrounding vacuum. Thus, the classical isolated source charge is actually a peculiar quantum field theory dipolar ensemble. The bare charge in the middle is surrounded by a cluster of virtual charges of opposite sign in the seething vacuum. In quantum field theory, both the central bare charge and the total charge of its surrounding cluster of virtual charges are infinite, but to an external observer their difference is finite. Hence the externally observed or externally measured value of the charge ensemble is that finite difference, and that difference has the sign of bare charge in the middle. The magnitude of that observable difference is the classical textbook value of the magnitude of the observed charge of the so-called isolated charged particle. Again, in quantum field theory, the single charge is not isolated at all, but is an ensemble of opposite charges. As such, quantum field theory ensemble comprising the classical isolated source charge must exhibit the experimentally proven broken symmetry of opposite charges. The associated classical static electromagnetic field in space surrounding a classical fixed isolated source charge is comprised of photons, quanta of the field. Since any photon in free space is moving at light speed, a stream of observable photons is continuously emitted in all directions from the source charge. This continuous emission of real observable electromagnetic energy by a charge is also easily verified experimentally. Simply separate a static charge and instrumentally observe the appearance and expansion of its external field radially in all directions, spreading outward at light speed. The so-called static field in space consists of photons moving at light speed. It is not static entity at all, but is a non-equilibrium steady-state system. As Van Flatern points out, to retain causality, we must distinguish two distinct meanings of the term static. One meaning is unchanging in the sense of no moving parts. The other meaning is sameness from moment to moment by continual replacement of all moving parts. We can visualize this difference by thinking of a waterfall. A frozen waterfall is static in the first sense, and a flowing waterfall is static in the second sense. Both are essentially the same at every moment, yet the latter has moving parts capable of transferring momentum, and is made of entities that propagate. Causality seems to require the latter. As is well known, there is no observable electromagnetic energy input to the source charge, and no instrument can measure any such input. Immediately one is confronted by a terrible dilemma: either the charge freely and continuously creates real, observable electromagnetic energy out of nothing at all, and thereby completely falsifies the conservation of energy law, or else it must receive and transduce, coherently integrate to observable form, a continuous input of electromagnetic energy in non-observable virtual state form. The standard electrical power engineering model, Maxwell-Heaviside electrodynamics, which does not consider virtual state energy inputs, thus has a formidable problem. It implicitly assumes that every electromagnetic field, electromagnetic potential, and joule of electromagnetic energy in the universe is and has been freely created out of nothing at all, in total violation of the conservation of energy law. This is the source charge problem, recognized as the most difficult problem in classical and quantum electrodynamics. It has been scrubbed from the classical texts for 100 years, and today's electrical power engineering students have little or no knowledge that the problem even exists. Even most electrical engineering professors seem unaware of this horrendous problem in their electrical power engineering electrodynamics model. Solution to the source charge problem. Obviously one must either totally surrender the conservation of energy law or else one must extend the classical electromagnetics model to allow non-observable electromagnetic energy input to the source charge as a dipolar ensemble. Unless such input is accounted for, one's model accepts free and universal creation of energy from nothing. In short, the source charge must absorb disordered virtual photon energy of the seething vacuum, transduce coherently integrate the absorbed virtual energy into real observable photons, and re-emit real observable photons in all directions to form the associated ordered macroscopic fields and potentials. This requires that the source charge be recognized as a non-equilibrium steady-state thermodynamics system, continuously consuming positive entropy of the virtual state vacuum and transducing it into negative entropy in the observable state. It thus continuously pours out real photons, thereby establishing and maintaining its associated fields and potentials. As dipolar ensemble in quantum field theory, the source charge must exhibit the broken symmetry of opposite charges. A priori, such broken symmetry means that the input energy is received in virtual state form and results in observable energy output. So this broken symmetry action of the source charge is a continuous negative entropy operation, totally violating the present form of the classical second law of thermodynamics, since that form prohibits negative entropy. Evans and Rondini have shown theoretically that non-equilibrium steady-state systems can produce continuous negative entropy, although they could find no known physical system that exhibited continuous negative entropy. It only takes one white crow to prove that not all crows are black. It follows that exhibiting a single physical system continuously producing negative entropy, continuous recovery of entropic energy is sufficient to overturn the present form of the second law in its entirety. Consequently, we have exhibited such a system, the source charge. Every charge in the universe, together with its associated fields and potentials, continuously produces negative entropy and totally negates the overly restrictive present form of the second law of thermodynamics. Evans and Rondini have shown theoretical permissibility, and the source charge experimentally confirms it. The present invention is a second entire class of systems also violating the classical second law while fully complying with the laws of physics. The second law must therefore be revised and expanded, and the extended law must include negative entropy operations as well as positive entropy operations. As presently written, the erroneous second law of thermodynamics excludes every charge in the universe, every electromagnetic field, every electromagnetic potential, and every joule of electromagnetic energy. It is also completely excludes free Riemann, a proven cornerstone of modern physics. We have previously restated an appropriate revised second law as follows: first, a negative entropy interaction occurs to produce some controlled order, available controlled energy. Then that initial available controlled order will either remain the same or be progressively disordered and decontrolled by subsequent entropic interactions over time, unless additional entropy interactions occur and intervene.